Hey guys, tonight we begin with a house, but not just any house. This one creaks when no one's walking, requires 5 servants just to make tea, and has more rules than a boarding school run by ghosts. Victorian mansions were less cozy home, more stage set for anxiety with doilies. You don't live in one so much as survive it, in a corset. So before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable. Let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You wake up inside a house that breathes louder than you do. The wallpaper groans. The fireplace sulks cold in the corner. Somewhere above, a floorboard creaks in slow protest, like even the ceiling resents your existence. The window nearest your bed is wearing a lacy veil of frost, which would be charming if it weren't also on the inside. You pull the covers up to your nose, but it's no use. The chill has already colonized your bones. Your breath fogs out in little clouds as you stare at the ceiling, waiting for the will to survive to arrive fashionably late, as usual. Your bed is magnificent and somehow vindictive. The headboard could double as a cathedral door. The mattress sags in the middle like it lost a battle long ago, and the pillows, filled with what you can only assume is shaved granite, have refused to cooperate since Tuesday. A bell cord dangles by your bedside, but you know better than to pull it. That summons a maid, and with her comes judgment, disapproval, and at least one comment about your posture. You slide out from under the covers like you're escaping a crime scene. The floor is made of ice disguised as wood. Your slippers are missing again, which means the cat has moved them to the conservatory out of spite. You tiptoe across the rug, past the decorative fireplace that's more for show than function, and begin the process of dressing, which is less about covering your body and more about constructing a textile fortress. First, the camise, then the corset, which you wrestle with like a hostile octopus, only less forgiving. Then petticoats, overskirts, a blouse with buttons invented by sadists, stockings, garters, and finally, boots that require the strength of 3 oxen and a spiritual calling. By the time you're presentable, you've broken a sweat and possibly a rib. You check the mirror. It judges you silently. Every wrinkle in your sleeve is a personal failing. The hallway outside your room is a tunnel of silence, broken only by the soft clink of silverware being polished. 2 floors down. The gas lamps flicker like they're in mourning. You pass a window and pause to watch your own breath puff in the cold air. Somewhere deep in the house, a servant rings a bell, and the sound travels like gossip through the walls. Breakfast is in the morning room, which is ironic, because it takes the better part of the morning to get there. You cross the red room, which is red, angry, and smells like dust and bad decisions. Then the music room, which hasn't hosted music since your cousin's ill-fated attempt at the violin last Christmas. The hallway narrows for no reason before widening into the corridor of ancestral portraits, each one staring down at you with a face like spoiled porridge. Finally, the morning room, where the table is already set. 12 chairs for 3 people. Plates the size of serving trays. A teapot so delicate it's probably never been used, just admired from a distance like a relic from a war no one won. Your father sits at the head of the table, newspaper unfolded like a barricade. He grunts. Your mother offers a smile that could slice fruit. You nod, sit, and receive a tepid cup of tea from a maid who neither likes nor fears you, which is somehow worse. There is toast. It is cold. There is porridge. It is beige. There is bacon, which smells amazing and exists solely to taunt you because the family doctor said it was morally compromising. You spread marmalade onto toast with the concentration of someone disarming a bomb. You chew, You count the seconds until you're free to leave. No one speaks unless spoken to. The silence isn't awkward. It's ceremonial. Outside the frost-slicked windows, the garden sulks beneath a blanket of mist. You sip your tea, which tastes like hot indecision, and glance at the ornate clock ticking on the mantel. It's only been 9 minutes. You still have the entire day ahead of you. That includes social visits, embroidery, and pretending to read poetry while slowly losing the will to blink. The house hums around you, not warmly, not kindly, but with the quiet, seething energy of a building that knows it will outlive you. Every window sighs in drafts. Every corridor watches. Every stair holds its breath as you descend. You live here. You are lucky, they say. You are fortunate, they insist. You wrap your shawl tighter, stare at the untouched butter knife across the table, and wonder what it would be like to live somewhere that didn't feel like it was swallowing you whole. The room wakes up before you do, not with light or warmth, but with a slow creak from the wardrobe and the faint smell of lavender mixed with mildew, like someone once tried to hide decay under potpourri and then gave up halfway through. Your bedroom isn't cozy. It's curated. Less a place for sleeping and more a historical exhibit you've accidentally moved into. The kind of room where touching anything feels like a crime and sitting on the wrong chair might summon an ancestor. Your bed frame looms like it has opinions. Carved wood, taller than necessary, heavier than most livestock, and designed by someone who clearly hated doors. It dominates the space like a throne you didn't ask for, surrounded by drapery thick enough to block out sunlight, sound, and probably divine intervention. The mattress is lumpy in very specific places, like it remembers the shape of someone with bad intentions. You don't ask questions. You just sleep around the hills and valleys like a diplomatic guest in a hostile country. The wallpaper is floral, faded, and entirely aware of your shortcomings. It peels in the corners and shimmers in the right light, as if mocking you with its age. Somewhere beneath the paper, the wall itself is likely cracked, possibly haunted. You've never checked. No one does. The room's aesthetic is what historians would call deeply committed to confusion. Nothing matches. The armchair is upholstered in gold brocade. The curtains are blue velvet. The rug is a Persian transplant from a different century, and your vanity is French, chipped, and still pretending it's glamorous. Above the fireplace hangs a mirror so ornate it could double as a weapon. It distorts slightly in the center, like the glass is tired of reflecting this particular corner of your life. Every time you look into it, you seem paler, more suspicious, and slightly crooked. You tell yourself it's the angle. You tell yourself a lot of things in this room. There are clocks, 3 of them, none in sync. One ticks slowly, the other too fast, and the third doesn't tick at all. It hums faintly like it's waiting for something. You once tried winding it. It chimed twice, then stopped. You haven't touched it since. The ticking fills the room at night, a soft, relentless reminder that time passes whether you enjoy it or not. In one corner stands a writing desk, the kind that encourages you to compose long letters filled with melancholy and impressive penmanship. You mostly use it to store gloves. Occasionally you sit there, open the inkwell, and think about writing something meaningful. Then the wind whistles through the window frame, and the desire fades. There's a painting on the far wall, a woman in a bonnet, staring out with the unmistakable expression of someone who disapproves of your posture, your hair, and probably your entire existence. No one knows who she is. She came with the house. You've named her Judith. She has seen things. Your wardrobe smells like cedar and secrets. It holds precisely 17 garments, all of them heavy, all of them designed to make simple movements feel like events. Lace, ruffles, buttons in places no one should ever need buttons. You pull out a day dress, and it sighs as it unfolds, like even the clothing is tired of this routine. In the mornings, light filters through the curtains in slivers, casting stripes across the floorboards like the room is behind bars. You dress quickly, not because you're in a rush, but because the bedroom has a way of making you feel like an imposter if you linger too long. This isn't your sanctuary. It's your stage. You play the part of occupant while the furniture quietly judges your performance. On the mantel sits a small porcelain dog, chipped at the tail, possibly a gift, possibly a warning. No one remembers who placed it there. It's always been there. You've grown to accept its presence the way you accept the smell of old wood and the occasional whisper of air under the door when no one's passing by. This room doesn't care if you're comfortable. It doesn't exist for comfort. It exists to remind you that your life is on display, that every object has been curated for maximum ancestral guilt, and that the concept of matching decor is a modern lie. You don't sleep here so much as you surrender. You don't live here, you inhabit. You adjust, you comply. And when the house shifts, when the mirror hums, and Judith seems to blink, you simply turn out the light and hope that whatever memory the room is reliving tonight, it's not one that ends with you. You begin your day already behind schedule, not because you slept in, but because the act of getting dressed is less of a routine and more of a collaborative engineering project between desperation, outdated moral values, and your long-suffering maid who has seen too much. Victorian fashion doesn't believe in convenience. It believes in discipline, layers upon layers of it. You don't just get dressed, you are constructed. Your chemise is the base layer, thin and shapeless, designed to protect your expensive clothes from your disappointing human skin. Over that goes the corset, a beautiful, horrifying device made of whalebone and societal expectations. You raise your arms and brace yourself against the bedpost while your maid pulls the laces like she's starting a lawnmower. Each tug pushes your ribs closer to your spine. You try to breathe, but breathing is a luxury for the idle and the dead. She tugs again. Your spine compresses. Your vision sparkles. Somewhere in the background, your lungs file a formal complaint. Corsetry isn't just about silhouette. It's about signaling to everyone that you don't need to bend over, run, or digest food properly. You exist to be looked at, not to function. Once your waist has been narrowed to the width of a respectable candle, you are trussed up in a petticoat that rustles like 1,000 moths trying to escape. Over that, another petticoat, then the bustle, which adds volume to a part of your body you're not allowed to acknowledge publicly. Victorian modesty is deeply obsessed with hiding curves by accentuating them and then pretending no one notices. Now comes the dress. Today's selection is navy blue with a high collar that could double as a neck brace. It has buttons, 47 of them, most in places you cannot reach unless you dislocate a shoulder or make a deal with dark forces. Your maid fastens them one by one with the solemnity of a nun lighting altar candles. Each button clicks into place like a door locking behind you. You ask what time it is. She informs you, delicately, that you were supposed to be downstairs 15 minutes ago. You sigh through half an available lung and reach for your boots, which require both hands, a boot hook, and divine intervention. By the time you're fully dressed, you are a walking sculpture, stiff, elegant, and completely incapable of basic tasks like turning around or sneezing without risking structural failure. You catch a glimpse of yourself in the mirror. You look magnificent. You feel like a taxidermy project. Men have it no better. Cravats must be tied with a level of precision usually reserved for nautical knots and surgical stitching. Waistcoats are snug to the point of suspicion. Trousers must hang just so, not too long, not too short, and with a crease so sharp it could threaten diplomacy. A gentleman's collar should be high enough to suggest authority, but not so high as to interfere with passive-aggressive remarks over tea. You imagine running, not away, just in general. A brisk trot to fetch something, an energetic skip. It's hilarious. Every movement is carefully curated. Sit too fast, and your seams protest. Bend over, and your bustle becomes an uninvited participant. Laugh too hard, and your corset reminds you who's really in charge. There is no freedom here. Only the illusion of refinement pressed into cotton and bone. Accessories are not optional. Gloves, even indoors. Jewelry that catches the light and the judgment of your peers. A hat, if you dare step outside, pinned to your scalp like a crown of tasteful inconvenience. You are dressed for admiration, not for weather, comfort, or any activity involving stairs. By the time you descend to join the others, you are 30 minutes late, slightly dizzy, and acutely aware of the seam digging into your rib cage. No one comments. They simply nod, glance at the clock, and sip their tea. Your delay is expected. You are, after all, dressed appropriately. Fashion in this house is a quiet war of endurance. You don't win. You just survive until evening, when the ritual repeats in reverse, and you peel yourself out of your garments like a butterfly that regrets its entire metamorphosis. You collapse into nightwear, which is somehow still complicated, and drift to sleep wondering how many buttons it would take to trap a soul. The answer, probably, is 47. You arrive in the breakfast room like a prisoner walking into a courtroom. No one looks up, but they all register your presence. The silence is cultivated, like a hedge maze, dense, manicured, and full of hidden judgments. The table stretches farther than necessary, draped in linen so stiff it could be used to reinforce ceilings. At one end, your father rustles the newspaper like it's personally betrayed him. At the other, your mother rearranges marmalade jars with the grim precision of someone pretending not to have opinions. You sit carefully. Chairs here are upholstered in discomfort and family expectation. The place setting in front of you is a constellation of silver, porcelain, and quiet threat. Napkin folded just so, spoon perched like it's posing for a portrait, toast standing upright in a rack designed to eliminate warmth entirely. It's less a meal and more a slow-speed etiquette exam where failure comes with social exile and jam stains. You're not allowed to pour your own tea. This is not because you are incapable, but because there are rules. The maid will do it. When she arrives, eventually, you wait in silence, staring at the teapot like it owes you money. It's delicate, floral, and probably worth more than a year's wages for someone who actually does things. When the tea is finally poured, it's lukewarm and smells faintly of lavender and disappointment. You nod your thanks, which is correct, and don't speak, which is also correct. Breakfast is not a time for conversation. It is a time for quiet chewing and repressed emotions. There is toast. It is dry, brittle, and organized with military precision. The butter is presented in a small dish, too hard to spread without breaking something, either the toast or your will to live. You reach for your knife and commit the morning's first offense. Too much butter, applied too eagerly. Your mother doesn't say anything, but her eyebrows hold a 3-act tragedy. Your uncle clears his throat in the way that means he disapproves of modern enthusiasm. Even the maid pauses on her way out, as if marking the moment for future gossip. The eggs are already cold, poached, in theory. In reality, they resemble something that survived an accident and chose not to talk about it. You eat them anyway, because this is not a meal, it's an obligation with calories. Bacon lies limply on your plate. Present more as a concept than a food. The salt shaker is suspiciously heavy. The pepper's been missing since Tuesday, and the sugar tongs have disappeared again under mysterious circumstances. Someone suggests it was the cat. Someone else suggests it was you. No one is joking. Conversation begins halfway through the meal, reluctantly. Your brother mentions the weather, which is safe. Your aunt brings up the rector's sermon, which is dangerous. Your father grunts. Your cousin asks if you'll be joining them on the walk later. You say you might. This is interpreted as confirmation, evasion, or rebellion, depending on who's listening. Someone coughs. The conversation dies. Every sound is amplified. Forks tapping porcelain, the rustle of napkins, the slow, deliberate chewing of someone who has never hurried in their life. No one talks about feelings, or news, or what anyone actually wants. These are not breakfast topics. These are evening topics, if at all, and only after 2 sherries and a failed game of whist. You try for jam next. There are 3 jars. Strawberry, blackcurrant, and something that tastes like it was scraped from a memory of apricots. You choose the strawberry. Another mistake. Your grandmother always takes the strawberry. She says nothing, but the tension crystallizes, hovering just above the silverware like fog. The clock ticks. No one finishes eating. Exactly. They just slowly disengage, one by one, like actors leaving a stage mid-scene. Chairs scrape the floor in polite agony. Napkins are folded and abandoned like forgotten treaties. You remain seated a moment longer, waiting for your legs to remember how to function beneath several layers of dignity and starch. Breakfast is over. You haven't spoken more than a dozen words. You've offended at least 3 people, and your tea went cold before your reputation did. All in all, a successful morning. The house is enormous, but somehow always just a little too full. Every corner is accounted for. Every hallway leads to a door with a specific purpose, and none of them are meant for simply being. There is a drawing room, of course, where people pretend to enjoy each other's company under the weight of floral upholstery and inherited obligation. There's a morning room that no one uses in the actual morning because it faces west and is thus, by Victorian logic, perfectly suited to catching the afternoon sun while maintaining its incorrect name. There's a smoking room where no one actually smokes anymore, just frowns and sips port while quietly judging the wallpaper choices. You wander these rooms like a ghost who's too polite to rattle chains. Each one has a function, a reason, a time of day, and a social rulebook, and an unspoken understanding about who belongs there and why. But never you. Not entirely. You're allowed in, sure, but you're never quite of them. These rooms are for curated presence, not comfort. They are staged dioramas of respectability, covered in antimacassars and heavy drapes that trap not just dust, but decades of emotional repression. You try to sit in the morning room with a book once. The light is fine, the chair is stiff, and within 5 minutes someone asks if you're waiting for company. You say no. They nod, slow and suspicious, like you've just confessed to a minor crime. The silence that follows is less peaceful and more accusatory, as if the room itself is wondering why you're not embroidering something productive. You leave shortly after, chased out by furniture that clearly doesn't believe in idleness. The drawing room isn't much better. It smells faintly of furniture, polish, and formal apologies. There are cushions that must never be moved, and armchairs that look inviting but are actually traps for the spine. You sit for a while, surrounded by china figurines of women who look like they also haven't been allowed to sit comfortably in centuries. The mantel clock ticks like a passive-aggressive metronome. You consider speaking aloud, just to hear what your voice sounds like in here, but think better of it. The piano, though untouched since Easter, watches you like it might report back. Even the corridors have intentions. The long hallway with the rug that never quite lies flat, the one with the portraits of ancestors no one remembers but everyone respects. They aren't just spaces between rooms. They're narrow stage sets where you practice walking at the correct speed, hands politely at your sides, eyes cast respectfully downward unless addressed. There is no loitering. Loitering implies leisure, and leisure is only acceptable when draped in purpose. You think, briefly, of the outdoors, the garden, the grounds, the greenhouse that leaks and smells of soil and spoiled ambition. But even outside, there are paths, designated walking loops, benches placed not for rest but for contemplation, which is a very different and significantly less relaxing thing. You can walk in the garden, but not aimlessly. Aimlessness implies you don't have anything better to do, and in this house, that's considered a moral failing. So you return inside, looking for something somewhere that doesn't require explanation. You check the library, but someone's already in there, reading silently and furiously. The dining room is being reset for luncheon. The study is off limits unless you've recently inherited land or an argument. The linen closet is locked, probably because someone once tried exactly what you're thinking. In the end, you settle in the stairwell, third step from the top, just out of sight, just out of earshot, wedged between 2 floors where the house hasn't figured out what you're supposed to be yet. You sit, You breathe. You exist, very quietly, in the crack between expectations. It's not a proper room, of course, but for now, it's the closest you're going to get. The first rule of living in a Victorian mansion is simple. You do not run the house. You merely orbit it, trying not to trip over the people who actually do. The staff is everywhere and nowhere, drifting in and out of rooms like ghosts with better posture. You learn quickly that their movements follow a schedule known only to them, dictated by bells you never hear and rules you definitely don't understand. They clean rooms before you've left them, press clothes you haven't worn, and appear at your elbow with tea you don't remember asking for, but are now morally obligated to drink. The butler is the sun around which all domestic order rotates. He doesn't smile, exactly, but there's a slight upturn of the mouth when you use the right fork or remember to not speak at the door. His name is Mr. Addington, and he has been with the family longer than most of the wallpaper. He knows every drawer that sticks, every clock that runs fast, and every family scandal dating back to the reign of Queen Charlotte. You never hear his footsteps, only the soft rustle of authority as he glides into the room. He does not knock. He simply arrives. If you're sitting where he needs to dust, he will pause, wait exactly 3 seconds, and continue anyway. Then there are the maids, divided into complex hierarchies that no outsider can hope to decode. There's the housemaid, the parlor maid, the scullery maid, and one who always seems to be carrying either laundry or judgment. They move in swift silence, with expressions that suggest they've seen things no one ever should. They call you Miss or Sir, depending on the hour and your outfit. If you attempt to thank them, they blink as if you've committed a breach of international diplomacy. If you try to help, they will not speak to you again. You once tried to carry your own tea tray up the stairs. It caused a week-long ripple of confusion in the servants' quarters. Apparently, someone wept. The footmen are tall, polished, and decorative in the way that overly sharp cutlery is decorative, technically useful, but mostly there to be admired. They wear uniforms that cost more than your cousin's education and open doors with a level of ceremony typically reserved for royal decrees. They speak rarely, move beautifully, and always look like they're about to ask you to leave a party you weren't invited to. The cook lives below stairs, in a realm of boiling pots and shouted instructions, and rules over it like a tyrant with a wooden spoon. Her name is Mrs. Tilling, though most just call her ma'am, with the tone one might reserve for approaching a bear mid-nap. She feeds the entire house, including guests who arrive unannounced and cousins who pretend to be allergic to butter. No one argues with her, not even your father, who once tried and had his breakfast arrive cold for 3 weeks. She runs the kitchen like a warship. Everything has a place, and that place is not under your feet. You are not to enter unless you've been summoned, are bleeding, or are on fire. You've seen the kitchen exactly twice, once by accident, and once because the cat dragged something horrible down there and someone decided you should fetch it. You made it halfway to the scullery before being redirected with the kind of brisk efficiency that leaves emotional bruises. Even the gardeners seem to carry an air of quiet superiority. They wear earth under their nails like medals and look at you as if you are a particularly needy species of plant. You tried to ask one a question once. He replied with a nod so slow it felt biblical. The house survives because of them. You know this. You also know that your role is to not disturb the balance. Speak when spoken to. Move when motioned. Try not to stand in doorways for too long, or you will block something, and someone, somewhere, will know. You live upstairs, but they run everything else. They know which doors creak, which relatives lie, which window leaks cold in January. They know where you go, what you eat, and how long you linger at the breakfast table after everyone's gone. You pretend not to. Notice how much they notice, but they always do. You can feel it even when you don't see it. The subtle war humming just below the floorboards. The house may have been built for elegance and tradition, But what it really contains is an invisible battlefield, waged in silence, sideways glances, and teacups placed just a little too hard on polished surfaces. Upstairs is lace and porcelain. Downstairs is iron and steam. And between the two, an unspoken agreement. Pretend everything is fine. But nothing is ever really fine, because they know. The staff, the maids with their quiet footsteps and sharper memories. The footmen with their statuesque posture and encyclopedic recall of your worst moments. The cook with her clanging pans and accurate opinions. They hear everything, see everything, and remember details you were hoping no one noticed, like that time you accidentally knocked over the chamber pot and blamed it on the cat. Or the night you mistook the linen closet for the lavatory and made a choice you now deny completely. They never confront you, of course. That's not how this war works. They observe, they process, and then they gossip. Somewhere deep in the service halls, between the scullery and the drying room, your life is being reenacted in brutal, hilarious detail by people who know the layout of your bedroom better than you do. You once hear your name whispered behind a door you're not supposed to open. You don't linger. That's how people end up in cautionary family stories. At meals, the footman who pours your water does so with just enough pause to remind you of last Thursday's incident with the window latch. The maid who lays out your gloves always arranges them a little too precisely, as if testing whether you'll notice they've been judged. Even the housekeeper, who never speaks to you directly, somehow manages to adjust the flower arrangements in your room based on your mood. She senses things. She has powers. You try to behave. You really do. But the house is full of creaking floors and heavy doors that don't always latch. It's not your fault that your slippers echo like cannon fire at midnight, or that your stomach makes suspicious noises exactly as the clock strikes 3. Once, you sneeze during the witching hour and hear a distinctly stifled giggle from behind the wall. You never find out who it was. The boundaries between upstairs and downstairs are thick but not soundproof. There's a dumbwaiter near the pantry that might as well be a telephone line. Anything said too loud, too sharp, or too odd finds its way into that shaft and arrives in the kitchen before you finish saying it. You begin to speak in vague sentences. You censor your yawns. You develop a sudden reverence for silence. Still, the staff always knows more than they let on. They notice when someone visits your room too late in the evening. They notice when you switch tea blends and don't tell anyone. They notice when you're peeful in 4. Handkerchiefs go missing and come back embroidered with initials that aren't yours. They know, and they never say anything directly. But a folded napkin, a raised eyebrow, a perfectly timed cough during breakfast tells you everything. The war isn't cruel. It's just constant. A gentle, relentless tension held in curtain hems and door hinges. You keep up appearances. They keep the machinery running, and somewhere in the middle, mutual understanding simmers like soup left on the back burner, never boiling over, but always warm enough to remind you not to turn your back. You live upstairs, but they live in the walls, and the walls never forget. You open the library door and immediately sneeze. Not a polite little cough, but a full-body explosion of dust and indignation. The room smells like old paper, older wood, and the kind of knowledge no one actually wants to learn. The air is thick with age, like it's been held in here for centuries and only escapes in small, suspicious bursts. Sunlight filters in through heavy drapes, casting long lines across books that haven't been touched since Queen Victoria was still figuring out how to frown properly. The shelves are tall enough to require a ladder and threatening enough to discourage anyone from actually using it. You glance up at the rows above your head, wondering if anyone's ever checked those titles, or if they're just there to impress visiting uncles with monocles and strong opinions about Latin. One entire section appears to be dedicated to the moral failings of the French. Another is simply labeled Misc. Concerning witches? You don't ask. The books themselves are a mixture of charming and cursed. Some have gold leaf and velvet bindings. Others look like they were bound in despair. You pick one at random and a tiny moth flutters out, offended that you've disrupted its bachelor pad. The pages crackle as you turn them, revealing outdated maps, poorly sketched anatomy, and a paragraph on hygiene that reads more like a dare. It's a strange comfort, this blend of must and mystery, as if the room itself is daring you to learn something obscure and immediately useless. The fireplace hasn't been lit in decades, but someone still polishes the grate like it might come back to life out of sheer guilt. The armchairs are stiff with respectability, their upholstery faded into a neutral sort of disapproval. There's a reading table in the middle, wide enough for several open volumes and a sense of dread. On top of it, a stack of bookmarks made from pressed flowers, and for some reason, a single glove that no one has claimed. You don't touch it. It looks like it knows too much. Then there's the desk. The desk is older than the floorboards it stands on. Its legs are carved with faces that might once have been cherubs, but now look like tax auditors. The surface is littered with half-filled ink bottles, brittle quills, and a ledger filled with names that stop abruptly in the year 1871. You run your hand along the edge and feel a bump beneath the finish. A drawer, out of sight. You bend down. It's small, subtle, locked, and carved with a label in all caps, "Do not touch," which is, of course, the fastest way to ensure you touch something. You glance around. No footsteps. No cough from the hallway. The staff is busy with lunch preparations or strategically ignoring your existence. You jiggle the drawer gently. Locked. You try a letter opener. Still locked. You try sheer determination and Victorian optimism. No luck. The drawer remains closed, smug in its secrecy. You sit back, defeated but intrigued. It could contain anything: old love letters, ancestral curses, receipts for questionable purchases, or maybe just a half-eaten biscuit and someone's final shred of patience. You return to the shelves. One book leans out farther than the others. You give it a nudge. Nothing happens, but now you're suspicious. Another is missing entirely, and in its place is a handwritten note that simply says, "Reassigned to drawing room. May God forgive us." You don't know what that means. You also don't ask. Time slows in here. The clocks tick, but they do it reluctantly. The light dims, even though the sun is still high. You feel watched, but not in a threatening way, more like the room is waiting to see what you'll do next and quietly betting against you. You sit in the armchair anyway. Open another book. This one smells like cloves and denial. You read a paragraph about Victorian dental tools and wish you hadn't. Dust settles again around you, soft and judgmental. The drawer remains closed. The secrets remain buried. And the library, with all its peculiar charm and stubborn gloom, simply watches as you inhale, another sneeze, and keep turning the page. The drawing room smells like bergamot, betrayal, and furniture polish. You sit straight-backed in a chair that clearly resents being sat on, surrounded by relatives who are smiling the way people smile when they've memorized the rules of warfare but can't use weapons. Afternoon tea is not a break in the day. It is a performance, a skirmish dressed in lace and lemon curd. The tea arrives on a cart so polished it reflects your own panic. The maid unloads porcelain cups with the precision of a surgeon and the quiet condemnation of someone who knows how many teaspoons you've dropped in your lifetime. The pot is steaming, the sugar is in cubes, and the milk is served in a vessel shaped like a cow for reasons no one will explain. You nod politely and pretend to know what to do. This is not your first tea. It is, however, the first time you've had to do it in front of Aunt Dorothea, who once ended a friendship over marmalade. You are offered the tray. This is a trap. There are two kinds of scones on it, plain and currant. You've forgotten which one your cousin always takes. You hesitate. That's mistake number one. A real player never hesitates. You reach for the one that looks safest, only to have your hand subtly intercepted by your great-aunt's teaspoon. Not a word is spoken. Just the clink of silver against china, and the unmistakable message. Not that one. You take the other. Someone coughs delicately. The tea is being poured now, and everyone is watching. You know because no one is blinking. The pour must be smooth, but not dramatic. Milk first or tea? You're sure you read something about that, but now your brain is just repeating the words "pinkies out" like a distress signal. You choose milk first, trying to look casual, like you always do it that way, and not because you panic chose. Your mother shifts ever so slightly in her chair. That's mistake number 2. Your cousin, seated to your left, smiles with too many teeth and asks if you'll be attending the musicale next week. You say yes, even though you didn't know there was one. She nods. You've walked into something. She passes the jam. You take a polite spoonful. Then she passes the cream. The real stuff, thick enough to hold a grudge. You apply both to your scone with what you hope is aristocratic grace. Then she asks if you always do cream on top. There it is, the third mistake, the real one. Half the room freezes. The other half pretends not to have heard, which only makes it worse. You try to answer diplomatically, something about regional differences, but you can already feel the shift in the air. Your uncle clears his throat in a way that could mean, "Let it go," or "This is how family rifts start." Either way, you lower your scone back to the plate like it's an unexploded device. Conversation stutters forward again. Someone brings up the weather. Someone else mentions a cousin's engagement, which sparks polite questions about fabric, menus, and whether or not the groom has teeth. You sip your tea carefully, realizing too late it's gone cold. You drink it anyway. Temperature is a luxury. Survival is the goal. Every movement is monitored. Napkin placement, elbow positioning. The way you stir your tea must follow a clockwise motion unless you want someone's monocle to fog in fury. You excuse yourself exactly 2 minutes before the half-hour mark, which signals attentiveness without desperation. Everyone nods as you rise. No one smiles. You've made it out with only minor damage. Once outside the room, you exhale for the first time in 20 minutes. Your hands are shaking, your scone sits mostly untouched, and the taste of judgment lingers stronger than the Earl Grey. You survive tea, barely. Tomorrow, it will be dinner, and the cutlery has more pieces. The drawing room is already full when you arrive, which means you're late or perfectly on time, depending on which relative you ask and how passive-aggressive they're feeling. The air hangs thick with the scent of rosewater, pipe smoke, and generational tension. The curtains are drawn just enough to suggest intimacy, but not enough to let in sunlight that might expose the dust. Everyone is seated, but no one looks comfortable. The chairs are upholstered in patterns that actively repel joy, and the sofas seem designed to prevent any lounging that could be construed as human. You sit gingerly on a seat that feels more ceremonial than practical, and place your hands where everyone can see them. Folding them in your lap means you're timid. Resting them on the armrest means you're arrogant. You settle for a compromise that screams neutral suffering. Conversation is already underway, though calling it conversation is generous. It's more of a verbal ballet where the steps are precise, the music is silent, and one wrong move means social exile. A distant cousin is talking about the weather, not the current weather, but the kind they had 2 counties over 3 days ago, which is somehow relevant to the price of eggs and the future of society. You nod along, having learned that nodding is safer than speaking. Your aunt asks if you've read the latest serial in the newspaper. You have, but not closely. And you're certain she's only asking so she can tell you how it compares unfavorably to one published in 1864. You agree with a vague comment about pacing and tone, which earns you a nod of approval so slight it could be a muscle spasm. Someone mentions the vicar. Someone else sighs. This is the most controversial thing that will happen all evening. The fire crackles in the hearth, not out of warmth, but obligation. The flames flicker with just enough enthusiasm to say, "We tried," casting shadows that dance on the wallpaper like memories everyone's trying to ignore. The tea tray arrives, not for refreshment, but as a prop to anchor the illusion that something is happening. You decline a biscuit. Taking one implies appetite. Declining one implies restraint. Either can be used against you depending on who's watching. Your uncle begins a story he's told 12 times this year. You could recite it backwards in your sleep. It involves a fishing trip, a duke, and an eel that may or may not have been cursed. Everyone laughs at the same spots they always do. No one hears the story anymore. It's a ritual, like lighting candles or pretending to like boiled vegetables. You glance at the clock. Only 15 minutes have passed. The conversation shifts to gardening, then to morning etiquette, then to whether or not birds should be fed in winter. Each topic is handled with the kind of careful diplomacy usually reserved for border negotiations. No one wants to be too interested. Passion is unbecoming unless it's about taxonomies or Victorian drainage systems. You try to speak once. A comment about the parlor wallpaper being replaced. 3 people blink at you like you've discussed nudity in church. You retreat behind your teacup, which thankfully hides most expressions. No one argues. That would require sincerity. Instead, disagreements take the form of pointed silences, over-articulated syllables, and the strategic repositioning of ankles. A single raised eyebrow from your grandmother carries more criticism than a 5-page letter. You've seen people flee entire counties after a well-timed throat clear. And yet, beneath the stiffness in the theater, there's something weirdly comforting. The drawing room is exhausting, but it's predictable. The rules are ancient and absurd, but they're rules. You know your lines. You know when to smile, when to inhale sharply, when to glance toward the fireplace as if considering a thought too delicate to speak aloud. Eventually, someone suggests charades. There's a collective inhalation, followed by polite protest, followed by acceptance. You volunteer, because it's the only activity where you're allowed to be dramatic without being accused of impropriety. You mime a sheep. Someone guesses indigestion. It's the most honest moment of the evening. You try to move through the house like you're not being observed, but the house doesn't allow that. It watches. Always. Not with blinking surveillance or creaky floorboard theatrics, but with quiet, relentless awareness. Every room contains at least one pair of eyes that aren't yours, and most of them belong to people who died long before you were born. The portraits are the worst. Heavy oil paint faces in frames the size of headstones, gazing out from above mantels, down hallways, over staircases. They're not positioned randomly. Someone placed each one with the strategic intent of ensuring that no moment of awkward posture or whispered comment could occur without a witness. A silent jury of powdered wigs, rigid collars, and judgmental expressions frozen in time, arms folded like they've been waiting centuries for you to make the wrong choice. You try to ignore them. You try to convince yourself it's all in your head. But then you catch one Sir Percival, your great something, with his glassy blue stare and unconvincing mustache, and you swear the light hits his eyes differently every time you pass. The hallway gets colder around him. You've tried taking different routes to avoid him, but somehow you always end up under his gaze, feeling like you've been caught chewing with your mouth open by a man who died in 1843 of gout and moral superiority. Worse still is Margaret, your aunt. Technically your great aunt, but she moves with the energy of someone who's far too alive to be referred to in past tense. She appears where you least expect her, behind half-closed doors, at the end of corridors, already seated in the conservatory before you even decided to enter it. She doesn't speak much. She doesn't have to. She communicates through the subtle deployment of knitting needles and the disapproving art of sipping tea. Margaret sees everything. She knows when you've taken 2 sugar cubes instead of 1. She knows when your shoes are on the wrong rug. She knows when you've tried to sneak a novel that isn't on the approved reading list. Once, you're fairly certain she knew you were considering skipping church and managed to stand in front of the door with a tray of scones that had absolutely no right to be that ominous. You've never actually seen her walk. She simply materializes, and when she does speak, it's in carefully rationed syllables. Oh, is her preferred weapon. Just that slightly raised, feather light, but devastating. It's the sound of suspicion wearing a hat. She's the kind of person who can make you feel like you've confessed to a crime by asking how your afternoon was. And if you respond too quickly, you've lost. In the drawing room, she sits directly beneath the portrait of a woman who looks eerily like her. You're not convinced they're not the same person. Sometimes you forget which one blinked. At dinner, Margaret doesn't eat much. She observes. Fork poised, eyes narrow, mouth drawn in a line that suggests she's grading the conversation on a scale you will never understand. Your cousin once made a joke about trousers and was never invited back. The staff is terrified of her, which is impressive considering they aren't scared of the plumbing, the attic, or your uncle when he tries to dance. Even Cook lowers her voice when discussing the tea blend if Margaret is within earshot. You try to stay out of her way. But the house doesn't offer privacy. Even your bedroom isn't safe. There's a portrait above the fireplace of someone named Lady Agnes, whose only known contribution to family history is looking vaguely displeased from every angle. You've tried covering her with a scarf. It keeps falling off. You begin to move more carefully, speak in softer tones, dress a little neater, not because anyone asked you to, but because the eyes are always there, reminding you, you are not alone in this house. You are never truly alone. And if you're very quiet, late at night, you can hear Margaret's teacup gently returning to its saucer in the room below. Right on time. The thump comes just after midnight, when the house is at its most theatrical. Wind sighs against the window panes, like a widow with excellent timing, and the hallway gaslights flicker as though someone's trying to breathe through the walls. You lie very still beneath a mountain of wool blankets, counting ceiling cracks and pretending the sound came from a distant cart or perhaps the imagination of someone less rational than you. But then it happens again. Thump, deliberate, heavy, followed by a slow, dragging noise, as though something upstairs is reconsidering its position in the afterlife. The attic, of course, the one no one mentions unless the subject is insulation or ancestral madness. You've never been up there. The ladder is hidden behind a panel in the linen closet, accessible only by servants or the chronically curious. You fall somewhere in between. The sensible part of you says to ignore it. That part has a terrible track record. So you rise, light a candle, and wrap yourself in something that might be a dressing gown or might be a curtain. Hard to say in the dark. The hallway is colder than it should be. Older, too. Everything creaks, even things that shouldn't, like the wallpaper. You pass portraits that now seem mildly annoyed rather than judgmental, as if even they think you're being a bit dramatic. The linen closet door opens too easily. You pull the panel, the ladder groans, and you climb. The attic is not as dusty as you expect. It's worse. The air is thick, the kind of thick that implies memory and mildew had a child together. You raise your candle, illuminating a sea of trunks, hat boxes, and furniture that died in obscurity. The shapes are vague, like furniture trying to forget what it once was. The thump doesn't come again, but you know you're not alone. Then you see it. Not a ghost. Precisely. Nothing that dramatic. Just a chair rocking on its own, slowly, as if remembering someone who used to sit in it with particularly strong opinions about hem lengths and soup etiquette. You stare at it. It stares back in its own way. You take a step forward, and the rocking stops. But honestly, you're still more afraid of your cousin Reginald. Reginald, who believes dinner conversation should be competitive, who once declared modern poetry a plague and argued that the Romans had the right idea about plumbing and punishment. Reginald, who owns 7 walking sticks, none of which he needs. He claps when no one else claps. He clears his throat before disagreeing with you and then says, well, actually, as though he's unearthing a sacred truth and not just misquoting Cicero. His opinions arrive without warning and stay longer than the haunting in the attic. You survive the rocking chair, but you did not survive Reginald's monologue on proper paperweight usage. You can sense the ghost in the corner. You feel its attention like a breeze that forgot how to be air. It isn't angry. If anything, It seems tired, as if it's just waiting for you to stop making a fuss and go back to bed. You lower your candle and whisper a polite apology, just in case. The chair rocks once more, then stills. You climb down quietly, close the panel, and press the linen closet shut with a little more reverence than before. The house settles again. The portraits resume their silent surveillance, and somewhere below, Reginald is probably already awake, practicing a speech on the superiority of formal waistcoats. You've seen the ghost, but you still plan to sit far away from your cousin at breakfast. The dinner bell rings like a threat, echoing down the corridors with the cheerful menace of a well-fed gong. You freeze mid-step, already knowing you're behind. Dinner waits for no one, except perhaps for the family dog, who once delayed a meal by fainting dramatically in the foyer. You are not afforded such privileges. You arrive at the dining room just in time to be seated, which is to say, you are late. Not late enough to be reprimanded aloud, but late enough for father to lift one eyebrow and adjust his napkin like it personally offends him. The chandelier above flickers approvingly, casting flickering shadows on faces that do not smile, only observe. The table is not set, it is armed. 12 forks, 7 knives, an array of spoons that range in size from delicate tasting instrument to weapon of war. Everything glints. Everything is polished to a shine that borders on aggressive. You glance down the table and realize with horror that no two place settings are exactly alike. This is not a meal. This is a memory test disguised as etiquette. You sit and immediately forget how fingers work. The soup arrives. This is meant to be the easy part. It is not. You reach instinctively for a spoon that looks about the right size and are immediately met with a cough from your left. Aunt Josephine doesn't speak. She just coughs. Precisely. Once for wrong, twice for unacceptable. You switch to the other spoon, even though it looks suspiciously large, and try to eat like someone who understands temperature. The soup is carrot, but tastes mostly like surrender. Next comes the fish course. You know this because a footman appears holding a platter with something that looks freshly startled. A different set of cutlery has now taken center stage. One fork has a curved tine, and the knife has a slight notch, like it's been designed for fish-specific duels. You follow the lead of your cousin across the table, who makes a great show of slicing and lifting with the fluid grace of someone born with a sterling silver spoon in every pocket. You attempt to imitate the movement and immediately fling a fragment of trout onto your bread plate. Father clears his throat. Not a warning, just a reminder that your performance is being noted for future disappointment. The main course arrives with ceremony and meat that's been roasted within an inch of its previous life. You now have options. Too many options. Forks that curve, knives that saw, and one suspiciously small implement that looks more decorative than functional. You guess incorrectly, of course. The wrong knife for the roast. You might as well have just declared support for the French Revolution. Conversation begins not naturally, but like a ship's horn sounding through dense fog. Polite questions about your health, your reading list, your contribution to society. You say something neutral about Dickens and are immediately pulled into a half-hour debate over his portrayal of chimney sweeps. Uncle Lionel calls your view romantically naive. You call his waistcoat brave. The room goes quiet. Father lifts his glass. This is the part everyone dreads. His toasts are legendary for being short, pointed, and incredibly efficient at undermining the mood. He stands, raises his sherry, and announces how proud he is of those in the family who remember that tradition is not a costume, but a code. You blink. He sits. It's unclear if this was aimed at you, Reginald, or the unfortunate cousin who wore a velvet tie last Thursday. Dessert is served, but no one tastes it. It exists for form, not flavor. A pudding so dense it could be used as building material is politely dissected with tiny forks that buckle under pressure. You try one bite and immediately reconsider. The final course is silence. Dinner ends with the scraping of chairs and a carefully choreographed retreat to the drawing room. You follow, mentally tallying your mistakes and wondering if anyone noticed when you dropped your spoon and pretended not to. You are full, not of food, but of anxiety, starch, and shame. And tomorrow is Sunday, which means the roast will come with judgment and a sermon. There is a bell in every room. Some are disguised as innocent cords, others are proud brass contraptions mounted to the wall, and a few are tucked so cleverly behind curtains and door frames that you suspect even the servants have forgotten they exist. Each one connects, via a mysterious and undoubtedly haunted network of wires, to a wooden panel in the servants' hall where tiny brass labels rattle at the slightest pull. Sometimes they ring without cause. Sometimes they ring when no one's touched them. No one ever explains why. You learn very quickly not to touch them unless you mean it. The first time you accidentally lean against the bell cord in the upstairs sitting room, it summons 3 staff members and a flurry of alarmed glances. You try to explain that you were only reaching for a biscuit, but it's too late. The damage is done. Cook is offended on principle. The butler makes a note in a mysterious leather-bound book, and a maid discreetly removes the biscuit tray as if your reach has tainted it. The bell remains silent for the rest of the day, though you're fairly certain it judges you when you pass by. The gas lamps are even worse. They hiss when lit, a soft, persistent sound that reminds you how easily your entire existence could be reduced to ash and charred upholstery. Each lamp must be carefully adjusted with a little brass key, a task performed with the reverence of a religious ceremony. Too much gas, and the flame dances wildly. Too little, and it vanishes with a sigh, leaving you to grope around in velvet darkness and question your life choices. Matches are always nearby, because nothing says safety like keeping open flames in rooms lined with silk drapes, oak furniture, and a carpet thick enough to swallow lesser mistakes. You light your own lamp once, just once. It takes 4 matches, a minor panic, and the loss of several eyebrow hairs, but you manage it. The flame catches with a dramatic whoosh, flares up as if trying to escape the glass, then settles into a sullen glow. You try to pretend it didn't just threaten your life. The scorch mark on the wallpaper says otherwise. Every night before bed, the lamps must be extinguished. This is done with a snuffer, which looks like a tiny, elegant guillotine for fire. The ceremony is oddly satisfying until the hallway is plunged into shadow and you remember how long the corridor is and how loud the floorboards can be when you're walking past the portrait of Lady Weatherby, whose eyes reflect more light than they should. There's also the matter of the flues. Each fireplace in the house has a personality. Some draw perfectly. Others belch smoke into the room with the enthusiasm of a dragon on its 3rd brandy. You're supposed to know which is which. You don't. You learn through trial and error and an increasingly large collection of soot-stained handkerchiefs. At least once a week, the entire drawing room fills with smoke, and everyone pretends not to notice while fanning themselves with monogrammed menus from dinners past. The house creaks constantly, not in the charming, old building sort of way, but in the deeply unsettling way of a structure that knows how you sleep and where you store your secrets. You wake sometimes to the sound of a bell ringing faintly from downstairs, though no one is awake and no one answers. Other nights, you dream of footsteps and wake to the smell of sulfur, only to find the gas lamp has extinguished itself, or worse, not extinguished at all. And still, the house continues, warm and cold in alternating bursts, alive with the silent hum of pipes and wires and servants who know better than you what each sound means. The walls hold in heat until they don't. The lamps stay lit until they whisper out. The bells ring even when they shouldn't. And you, wrapped in flannel and anticipation, lie awake wondering if that creak was the wind, the floorboard, or something else entirely, while the gas hisses softly beside your bed, waiting. You approach the bathroom with the caution of someone entering enemy territory. Not because it's haunted, although that's debatable, but because it's a Victorian bathroom, which is to say, it's more symbolic than functional. You push open the heavy door, and step into a room that seems entirely designed for appearances and punishment. Everything is made of porcelain or brass or something pretending to be both, and it's all freezing. The walls are tiled in a pattern that probably cost a fortune and still manages to make you feel like you're about to be interrogated by a stern pharmacist. There is a tub in the center of the room. It is claw-footed, elegant, and deeply accusatory. It doesn't have a proper tap. Instead, it's fed by two temperamental faucets that scream whenever you turn them. The hot water arrives on its own schedule, usually after you've given up. Cold water, on the other hand, is always ready to remind you who's in charge. You are not in charge. Bathing is not casual. It is an ordeal that requires assistance, timing, and a sense of emotional resilience. First, someone must heat the water. This involves carrying it by bucket from the kitchen boiler, a process that takes 3 people and at least 1 minor burn. You are told when the bath is ready, which is generous because by the time you reach it, the water is already plotting its exit. You lower yourself in with the kind of hesitation normally reserved for treaties and wild animals. The water touches your skin, and your soul briefly leaves your body. There is no privacy. Someone is always knocking. Someone is always nearby. You try to convince yourself that the footsteps in the corridor aren't slowing down near the door, but you know better. A household this size doesn't allow solitude. It just tolerates temporary unavailability. You bathe quickly, surrounded by the scent of lavender and the creeping realization that someone, somewhere, is judging how long you take to scrub your elbows. Soap is available in a dish that predates indoor plumbing. It crumbles if you look at it wrong and somehow makes you feel both unclean and over-perfumed. Towels are stiff and embroidered with initials that are not yours. You wrap yourself in one and step onto the tiled floor, which may as well be made of ice and bad decisions. Your feet go numb almost instantly. This is expected. Toilets, if you can call them that, are located in separate water closets. These are narrow, coffin-like chambers often located down the hall, across a drafty passageway, or up a small, cursed staircase. The toilet itself is a towering contraption with a pull chain that hangs from the ceiling like it's ringing for judgment. You sit, not comfortably, but because the alternative is worse. The walls are close enough to press your elbows against, and someone has carved a name into the wood paneling in what looks like desperation. There is no sink, just a basin and a jug. You pour your own water, like you're preparing a potion, and splash your face while trying not to knock over anything glass, ceramic, or delicate. The mirror above you is too small and too high, showing only your forehead and most of your anxiety. You dab at your face with a cloth that's seen better decades and try not to think about how many others have done exactly this in this exact spot, while wondering if modernity might eventually catch up. When you leave, the bathroom gives nothing back. No warmth, no satisfaction, just the faint scent of soap and the sound of the faucet dripping one last time out of spite. You dress quickly, reheated by the friction of wool and resentment, and as you return to the corridor, you pass Cousin Horace, who gives you a look that says he knows exactly how long you took and finds it excessive. He'll be next. The water will be colder. You feel oddly vindicated. You are not ready, and society does not care. She arrives uninvited, clutching a calling card and wearing too much perfume. She smells faintly of dried roses and sharp opinions, and she always wants tea. You hear the carriage wheels crunch on gravel long, before the butler announces a name that sounds like it belongs in a tragic novel. Lady this, Miss that, Colonel something retired. You don't know who half these people are, but you're expected to rise, nod, and remember which ones are still feuding about the incident with the swan. The drawing room is already prepared, which means the chairs are stiff and the conversation will be worse. You're guided in like a guest at your own execution. Everyone smiles the way cats smile at birds. The tea tray is laid out with surgical precision, china cups thinner than your patience, sandwiches cut into suspiciously neat triangles, and little cakes that flake into your lap at the worst possible moment. Introductions are made, You are described in vague terms. So accomplished, someone says, as if the act of standing upright in a corset counts as a skill. Another guest says they've heard about your piano playing. You have not touched the piano since the pedal fell off last month and nearly claimed your foot. But you nod politely and accept the compliment like a biscuit you didn't ask for. Lady Thistlethwaite talks about her new parlor wallpaper for what feels like a geological age. You murmur your approval while trying not to inhale too deeply. Someone has brought their lapdog, which yaps at shadows and occasionally vanishes under furniture, only to reappear from beneath your chair like a powdered ghost. You offer it a piece of cake in a moment of desperation. It sniffs and walks away, as if you've personally offended its ancestors. You are asked about your plans. Not your actual plans, which involve hiding in the library until sunset, but your social plans. Garden parties, recitals, luncheons, charitable endeavors. You mention a possible visit to the coast and are immediately met with advice on which sea air is best for your complexion. Someone recommends a town that burned down 3 years ago. You pretend to take notes on a napkin. Your cousin Beatrice is thriving. She is society's favorite beautiful in that effortless, symmetrical way and skilled at saying nothing with remarkable confidence. She glides through conversation like a swan raised in a conservatory, offering polished observations and double-edged compliments. You watch her closely, wondering how anyone can manage 3 simultaneous engagements, a secret suitor, and a charity for underprivileged pianists without physically disintegrating. An hour passes, possibly 2. Time folds in on itself during visits. The guests laugh at something you missed, and then glance to see if you're laughing too. You do, vaguely, though you're not entirely sure if it was a joke or a reference to a previous scandal involving marmalade. You reach for your teacup and discover it has gone cold, like your enthusiasm. At some point, a gentleman begins talking about fencing. No one asked him to. He does it anyway. He pantomimes a lunge with his walking stick and knocks over a tray of almonds. There is polite horror. The dog returns. You feel nothing. Finally, after the 7th mention of a new conservatory and a heated discussion about whether Mrs. Biddle's niece is really engaged or merely hopeful, the guests begin to rise. Gloves are adjusted, farewells exchanged. You stand by the door, smiling mechanically, already forgetting most of their names. You curtsy. They curtsy. There is a final comment about how delightful it all was, which is the social equivalent of wiping one's feet on the way out. The door closes. The silence is immediate and glorious. You exhale, pick an almond out of your shoe, and decide that the next time society calls, you'll pretend to be ill, or possibly French. The air in the conservatory sticks to your skin like gossip on a slow Tuesday. It's thick, perfumed with something green and slightly rotting, and you can already feel your collar wilting. The glass ceiling lets in too much light, the kind that turns people pink and secrets transparent. You try not to blink too often. Someone will notice, and noticing leads to questions, and questions lead to invitations you can't escape. You didn't mean to end up here. The conservatory lures you in the same way a beautifully set mousetrap does. At first glance, it's serene. Ferns unfurl like they're practicing ballet. Orchids lean coquettishly in their pots, and the palms sigh dramatically in every breeze. It smells faintly of lemons, mildew, and some flower you can never remember the name of but are definitely allergic to. It's peaceful. If you ignore the fact that every conversation happening within these glass walls is one step away from an emotional ambush. Lady Winthrop is already seated near the camellias, her lace parasol open indoors like it's shielding her from the moral decay of others. She's holding a fan she doesn't need, fluttering it against her corseted chest while dissecting the personal life of a woman who left the county 3 years ago. Beside her, Lord Everett is pretending to water a fern, but it's clear he's eavesdropping. The fern doesn't need water. Lord Everett just needs purpose. You smile because that's what one does. Neutral, non-committal, with just enough upward tilt to imply you're paying attention. A maid enters with a tray of cordial glasses, sweating slightly, just like you, and sets them down with the quiet resignation of someone who's heard everything and respects none of it. You take one. It tastes like regret and overripe fruit. Someone mentions your name. You tense. It's not accusatory, not yet, but it's said in that tone. The one where your full name is spoken, not because you're in trouble, but because you're about to be invited into a conversation that already decided what you think. It's about the vicar's niece, or the gardener's son, or the scandal involving someone's second cousin and a goat. You nod vaguely and sip again. Everywhere you look, the plants are thriving. Enormous leaves stretch toward the ceiling like they're auditioning for the role of jungle canopy. The roses are blooming out of season. One cactus looks like it's planning something. You briefly wonder if the plants grow better on secrets. Maybe that's why they're so healthy. Each root tangled in whispers, each bloom coaxed open by the slow heat of judgment. You attempt an exit. It fails. Miss Darlington appears by your side with the timing of a stage cue. She's young, sharp, and clearly practicing for her future as a professional widow. Her eyes are calculating, her compliments barbed in velvet. She asks if you've heard the news about the Sedgwick engagement, which isn't a question. It's a trapdoor. You step around it with a laugh, the kind that says you know more than you do and care less than you should. She smiles like a cat discovering a new birdcage. Somewhere near the back wall, someone's coughing dramatically. It could be consumption or attention-seeking, possibly both. The orchids lean closer. You feel watched, not by the people, but by the room itself. The conservatory doesn't forget. It holds on to heat, moisture, and everything ever said within it. A confession here would take root. A scandal would bloom in technicolor. You finally find the edge of the crowd, the part of the room where people pretend to be admiring the begonias just to be left alone. You take your place, exhale, and let your gaze drift over the tops of the plants, over the heads of people who know too much about your family's finances and your mother's migraines. The sun presses against the glass in long streaks, and you can feel your dignity slowly wilting beside the hydrangeas. And still, you smile, because this is the dance, because the plants are listening, and because Miss Darlington is definitely watching. They appear in doorways like summoned spirits, small and solemn, and dressed as if they're about to sign a mortgage. Starched collars, polished boots, and expressions forged in the same fire as antique marionettes. You catch one staring at you from behind a velvet curtain and wonder how long he's been there. The answer is probably always. The children in this house are not playful. They do not giggle or run or cry in public. They do not smear jam or chase dogs or shout about frogs in the garden. Instead, they hover. They appear beside pianos and stairwells and grandfather clocks with a quiet precision that suggests they were trained, not raised. You've never actually seen anyone teaching them, but they know Latin. They correct you on Latin. You once dropped a book, and a girl no taller than your elbow murmured the correct pronunciation of the author's name before vanishing into the wallpaper. They eat separately, at their own small table with chairs that look like they were made for interrogation rather than comfort. You're told they're being socialized. This mostly involves being handed books and sent outdoors in pairs, where they roam the hedgerows like a slow-moving fog. You see them sometimes through the windows, standing in perfect silence under trees, hands clasped, faces neutral. One of them waves once. You wave back. He turns and walks away like you just failed a test you didn't know you were taking. You are warned not to engage them too much. Children should be seen and not heard. In this house, they are barely even seen. They pass through rooms on the way to lessons, always accompanied by a governess who smells like peppermints and final warnings. You speak to her once, asking if the children enjoy their studies. She blinks slowly and says, "They do what they must," before continuing down the corridor like a Victorian crypt keeper with a lesson plan. They dress like their parents, but smaller and more judgmental. The boys wear waistcoats and trousers that suggest early training for a life of disappointing parliament. The girls are all lace and stiffness, their hair braided into submission. You once tried to compliment a young girl's ribbon, and she responded with, "Mother says vanity is for the weak." You were holding a mirror at the time. There's a nursery upstairs, which you accidentally wandered into once while trying to find the linen closet. It was quiet, too quiet. Dolls lined the walls like an audience. One blinked. You turned around and left, carefully closing the door behind you as if sealing something away. They're not cruel, exactly, just observant and unsettling. You get the feeling they know things, not just the location of the good silver or which adult cries in the library on Thursdays, but deeper things, ancestral things. You once caught one humming a lullaby you swear you've never heard but somehow recognized. It followed you for days. At family gatherings, they sit apart, perfect posture, hands folded, eyes fixed on the table as if communing with ghosts. Occasionally, one will whisper something into a sibling's ear, and they will both smile without teeth. You do not ask what they said. You wouldn't understand, and they know it. There's a theory whispered among the maids that the children of this house aren't raised but brewed, a slow distillation of lineage and expectation, steeped in etiquette and disappointment until they emerge, pale and ready for inspection. You laugh at the idea, but then you remember how one of them knew you were fibbing about the broken vase before you'd even opened your mouth. You don't fear them, exactly, but you do try not to blink too long when they're in the room, or look too closely at their drawings, which seem to feature a lot of symmetrical staircases and eyes that watch from walls. One day, you catch a tiny hand sliding a note under a door. You don't read it. You don't need to. Some things are better left between governesses, ghosts, and children who never raise their voices. The wind doesn't knock. It shrieks. It claws at the windows like it wants in, like it remembers something about you that you've tried to forget. You lie still under layers of wool and obligation, staring at the ceiling as the room shifts around you. Shadows move not because the fire flickers, but because the house is breathing. You tell yourself it's just the draft from the corridor. You tell yourself a lot of things at night. The bed is enormous and unforgiving, carved with somber flourishes and what might be thistles or angry cherubs. It smells faintly of polish, lavender, and historical disappointment. Your pillow is not a comfort so much as a cautionary tale. It crinkles slightly when you move, stuffed with horsehair and the soft whisper of old decisions. Your neck aches before you've even closed your eyes. You tried folding it once. The pillow didn't fold. It judged. The fire has stopped pretending to be helpful. It's a sullen glow in the grate now, licking lazily at the last coal as if it, too, has lost interest in this performance. You could call for more wood, but that would mean summoning someone. And summoning someone means a knock, a presence, a figure in the doorway, with an expression that says you've ruined their night with your delicate lungs and weak constitution. So you lie there, chilled at the edges, warm at the core, a human sandwich of linen, flannel, and existential dread. The wallpaper peels slightly in the corner, just enough to remind you that nothing in this house stays obedient forever. The pattern roses, possibly, or some kind of creeping vine twists in the candlelight like it's reconsidering its placement. You once asked if it had always looked like that. Someone said yes, in a tone that meant, don't ask again. You hear the clock downstairs chime the hour. You count along because it's tradition, and because it's something to do other than listen to the floorboards settle like arthritic ghosts. When it strikes midnight, you feel the room change, not dramatically, just colder, as if something noticed you were still awake. A branch taps the window pane once, twice, then stops. You tell yourself it's the wind, even though you're on the third floor, even though there are no trees that tall. You pull the blanket higher and pretend you didn't notice. The candle gutters. Its flame leans sideways, then sputters like it's choking on a name no one's spoken in decades. You watch it with the passive interest of someone who knows They can't win this battle. The light fails. The room swells with darkness, immediate and total. You know the shapes now, even without seeing them. The chair with the crooked back, the wardrobe with the door that never quite shuts, the coat rack that looks suspiciously humanoid if you forget it's there. Your eyes adjust slowly, or maybe not at all. The dark here has texture. It presses close, not threatening, just observing, waiting to see if you'll do something foolish, like get up for a glass of water or open the door to the hallway that hums like a beehive full of secrets. You curl tighter. The sheets rustle like old letters. Somewhere in the distance, a stair creaks. Just one, just enough. The wind returns to its lament outside, dragging the night along with it. You close your eyes and hope the morning remembers where it left you, because in this house, night is not for sleeping. It's for enduring. You dream of opulence, but it smells faintly of mildew and unpaid bills. The halls in your sleep stretch longer than they do in daylight, lined with oil portraits that whisper interest rates and property taxes instead of family history. You try to run, but your shoes are stuck in something thick and financial. Maybe it's unpaid coal deliveries. Maybe it's the slow sinking dread of another winter without insulation. Either way, you're late for a dinner you can't afford. In the dream, the chandeliers rattle above you, not from footsteps or wind, but from the tension of being showpieces in a house one bad quarter away from collapse. You reach out to steady one and feel the grime of 100 wax strips and a generation of pretending everything is fine. It sways gently, as if laughing. There are guests arriving, always more guests, in carriages that block the drive and with expectations that stretch further than the drawing room rugs. You haven't paid the rug cleaner. You're not sure the rug cleaner still exists. You open your mouth to explain and instead cough out dust. Not metaphorical dust. The kind that settles on ledgers and secrets. The house in your dream is louder than in waking life. The pipes groan like they remember better times. Somewhere in the distance, a boiler wheezes out its last breath like a dying Victorian baritone. You once thought you heard it sob. You are not convinced it was a hallucination. You wander into the conservatory, where the plants have stopped blooming and started judging. The orchids have wilted. The palms droop with the disappointment of creditors. One fern whispers the word default and then pretends it didn't. You back away carefully, because even in dreams, dignity is a currency you can't afford to spend. The house shifts again, revealing rooms you didn't know you had. A gallery full of unopened letters and unopened bank statements. A parlor where the wallpaper peels in embarrassment. A music room where the piano plays itself, pounding out a tune that sounds suspiciously like financial ruin set to a waltz. You listen for a moment before quietly shutting the door. There's a figure in the library now, flipping through the family account book with fingers too long and too familiar. You try to look away, but find yourself pulled in, page after page of candle expenditures, tea imports, glove repairs, coal orders that never arrived. Your name is there too, tucked in a margin like an afterthought. Next to it, a number, one you don't understand but absolutely fear. You wake in a cold room with a cracked teacup on the bedside table and a moth climbing the curtain. The ceiling above you still holds its plaster medallion like a badge of past glory, and the bedposts still stand tall like 4 unpaid sentinels. You stare at them for a moment, wondering what it costs to dream like that, wondering if you paid it already. Downstairs, someone is stoking the boiler. You hear the grumble of flame and the sluggish cough of ancient pipes. For a moment, it almost sounds like applause, but you know better. The house is still standing, and that is both the triumph and the tragedy, because every corner of it is a performance. And every morning you wake, the curtain rises again. They descend like a storm with hats. Carriages crunch gravel in the drive, horses snort indignantly, and a blur of silk, tweed, and overpacked trunks tumbles into your home like a traveling opera troupe. No warning, no letter, just 20 guests, most of whom are only tangentially related to you through marriage, military service, or a shared ancestor with a hyphenated surname and gout. You stand in the front hall, still holding the newspaper you were pretending to read, while a footman wrestles a hat box shaped like a flying saucer out of someone's arms. The guests chatter, clink, stomp, and declare things: how lovely the weather is, how thin you've gotten, how dreadfully long the journey was, despite the clearly unnecessary stop at that inn with the suspiciously French omelets. You nod and smile and say nothing that will get you trapped in a conversation about roads. Your butler appears at your side without being summoned, which means he's deeply concerned. You don't even look at him. You just say, "How many sheets do we have?" And he replies with something that is either a number or a quiet prayer. The guests do not notice. They're too busy exploring your house like it's a museum, and they're here to critique the exhibits. Someone you barely know calls your name from the second landing, already holding a vase you're fairly certain contains ashes. Another demands to know if the billiards room still smells like brandy. A third gestures at the parlor wallpaper and asks if it's new or just tired. You respond with a sound that could be interpreted as "indeed" or "help." In the drawing room, tea is being served at double speed. The staff are moving like they've trained for this. You catch a glimpse of the cook through the dining room door, white-knuckling a roast and mouthing something about improvisation while a maid sprints past with a tray of mismatched china. The good cups have already run out. You are now deep in the reserve stock, the ones with faint cracks and mysterious provenance. By evening, the house is full of laughter, footfalls, and the long, weary groans of plumbing not built for this many baths. You've answered the same 3 questions 17 times. You've learned 3 new country dances you will immediately forget. You've smiled so much your face aches, and you've only narrowly avoided 3 matchmaking attempts and 1 duel by backgammon. There's no space left to retreat. Every room is occupied. The conservatory is full of people telling dramatic stories about trains. The smoking room reeks of enthusiasm and cigars, and someone has turned the library into a salon for reading aloud from deeply personal letters found in drawers that were supposed to be locked. You try to intervene, but instead are handed a brandy and told to listen to this bit. It's scathing. As night falls, guests begin peeling off toward bed, each announcing their fatigue like royalty concluding a royal tour. You trail behind them like a ghostly concierge, pointing to rooms that may or may not have clean sheets, mentally assigning cousins to creaky beds and aunts to rooms where the wallpaper doesn't quite match. You do the math. The linens will run out before the patience does. Finally, you find yourself back in your room, shoes in your hand, trying not to wake the house that should have already been asleep. Outside your door, you hear footsteps, hushed giggles, and the unmistakable clink of someone stealing a midnight sherry. You let it happen. You've lost control. The house belongs to the guests now. You sit on the edge of your bed and breathe. You are the host, which, in this context, feels a lot like being the hostage. It always begins with the wrong door, not a subtle misstep, not a mistaken turn down a dark hallway. No, this is deliberate. A polished hand twisting a brass knob beneath a sign that clearly, plainly states "morning room," and stepping inside at twilight with all the quiet arrogance of a man who thinks rules are decorative. You're in the hallway when it happens, halfway through, balancing an overfilled tea tray and rehearsing a polite excuse to avoid another discussion on comparative fox hunting. The door creaks open behind you. A voice calls out a name that is absolutely not yours, with the lazy confidence of someone who assumes he is expected. You freeze, just long enough to hear the silence on the other side of the door. Not a scandal yet, but the scent is in the air. Because it's never just about the room, it's about who was already in it. The lady in question, if you can still call her that, had escaped to the morning room for a moment of solitude, or at least the kind of solitude that involves reclining on a chaise in a suspiciously artful posture, rereading the same paragraph for half an hour. Everyone knows she doesn't like brandy. Everyone knows she prefers windows to people. Everyone also knows that the morning room isn't a shortcut to the music room, the billiards table, or wherever he pretends he was trying to go. The door shuts, too quietly. You stand there, teacups trembling slightly on porcelain. You should walk away. The scandal hasn't occurred yet. Not technically. It is still preventable in theory, but in the strange math of this house, prevention rarely trumps observation. 15 minutes pass. A guest one who actually does need to pass through this hallway raises an eyebrow as they pause beside you. You shrug, which is the universal language for, I am not responsible for what happens next. They nod. The door opens again. And then, it's scandal. The lady exits first. Not hurried, but precise. Her hair in place. Her face unreadable in the way only practiced women manage. Behind her, he appears. Slightly disheveled, eyes a bit too bright, cufflinks back on but clearly fastened in the dark. They do not speak to each other. That would make it real. Now, it's gossip's turn. By dinner, the morning room has become a character in the retelling. Guests describe it like it's a stage set for betrayal. They mention the lighting, the velvet cushions, the suspicious lack of embroidery. Someone swears they saw a candlestick moved an inch from where it belonged. Someone else claims they'd suspected something since luncheon, which is always a lie. The worst part? The sign was right there. Morning room, not mystery alcove, not flirtation nook, not please enter if you'd like to be the subject of a poem. Read loudly at supper. No ambiguity, just brass letters and willful ignorance. She doesn't dine that evening. Neither does he, which is exactly what you do if you want everyone to think something happened. If you wanted to quash the whispers, you'd attend, perfectly composed, place a single slice of cucumber on your plate, and laugh at someone's dull joke about wainscoting. But no, they retreat, which means the whisper becomes a roar. The morning room is locked the next day, not for repair, not for privacy, but to give the illusion of control. Because once the wrong person walks through the wrong door, you can't ever quite shut it again. During daylight, the nursery is charming in the way taxidermy is charming still, delicate and vaguely unsettling if you look too closely. The wallpaper is floral, aggressively so, with tiny blue forget-me-nots twisting across the walls like they're trying to escape the pattern. A rocking horse presides from one corner, frozen mid-prance, with glassy eyes that suggest it's seen things no toy should. There are dolls, of course, dozens of them. Too many, really, lined up along the wall, slumped in chairs, staring at each other with stitched smiles and eyes that don't quite align. When the sun is high and the windows open, the room pretends to be innocent. Light glints off the china tea set with all the effort of a good lie. Tiny spoons, perfectly folded doll linens, the faint scent of lavender and talcum powder clinging to the air like it has nowhere else to go. You step lightly when you pass through, as if a louder footfall might wake something not meant to stir. But dusk changes everything. The air shifts first, grows heavier, not quite cold, but dense, like the atmosphere has thickened specifically to slow your breath. The dolls begin to feel less like toys and more like witnesses. Their smiles don't change, but the meaning behind them does. The rocking horse's shadow stretches further than it should. You could swear it wasn't facing the window before. You could swear you left the door open. No child has lived here in years. That's the thing you remind yourself, over and over. The nursery is a relic, preserved out of nostalgia or guilt, though no one will admit which. Someone once said it was for visiting cousins, but no cousin under 12 has stepped foot in this house since the incident with the cracked mobile and the shrieking. You don't ask which mobile. You've seen several that look like they'd crack on their own, with no supernatural interference. The whispers begin just after twilight, too soft to follow, too sharp to dismiss. You check the hallway, the windows, even under the nursery bed, which you know is ridiculous, but somehow still feels necessary. There's nothing, just an old linen doll half tucked beneath the frame, her face smudged and her hand raised like she's either waving or warning. You don't put her back. One night, you light a candle and step in. You want to see if the whispers follow you. They don't. They wait. The room watches. A draft nudges the dollhouse door open with the softest creak. You look inside. The miniature table is set for 3. No one ever remembers setting it. By the time you leave, the candle's nearly gone, and your heartbeat is somewhere near your throat. You tell yourself it's just a room, just toys and old wallpaper and childhood preserved like jam in a jar, sealed, sweet, and no longer real. But when you glance back from the hallway, one of the dolls is missing. You don't go back for a week. Eventually, someone mentions the nursery during tea. Casually, like it's a lovely little room, so quaint, such charm. You nod and sip your tea and say nothing. You think about the rocking horse and the soft rustle of unseen feet and the silence that always follows the whispers, as if they're waiting to see what you'll do next. You sleep with your door locked after that. No one tells you to. No one has to. They arrive in 2s and 3s, always unannounced, always carrying luggage that seems far too optimistic for a weekend visit. You recognize some of them by name, others only by vague resemblance to portraits hanging in rooms no one cleans. Cousins, great-aunts, step-somethings, from your father's first wife's second marriage. The family tree is more of a tangled hedge, and it sheds heavily in spring. Their timing is uncanny. Right as you're adjusting to a bearable routine, right when the sheets are dry, the silver's been polished, and the dining chairs have stopped wobbling. There's the unmistakable sound of gravel under wheels, and the scent of self-importance drifting in through the vestibule. You greet them with the kind of forced civility reserved for tax auditors and impromptu poetry readers. They respond with kisses that miss cheeks entirely and questions that sound suspiciously like financial probes. One wants to know about the roof repairs. Another asks about the value of the china, while carefully tilting the rim of a teacup to examine the maker's mark. The worst part is that no one admits to inviting them. You ask the housekeeper. She shrugs and mutters something about the post being unreliable this season. You ask your aunt, who claims she hasn't spoken to the cousin in years, but somehow remembers the exact date of their last scandal. Even the butler begins referring to them as the new arrivals, which is code for not my problem. They slip into the rhythm of the house without permission. One has taken over the smoking room, despite not smoking, simply because he likes the leather chairs. Another insists on leading prayers at breakfast, although you suspect he hasn't been inside a church since the Crimean War. The youngest is already lurking near the billiards table with a practiced air of entitlement, poking the cue chalk like it owes him money. You watch as they drift through rooms like museum patrons who've forgotten they aren't alone. They admire furniture with the same expression they use for rare horses. Pleasant, appraising, faintly acquisitive. At least one has made notes in a pocket ledger, pretending it's for poetry. They don't help with anything. You could set the drawing room on fire and they'd step over the smoke to ask if you've considered converting it into a solarium. When the bell rings for supper, they float in with the ease of practiced freeloaders and eat with the confidence of people who never see the bill. They comment on the temperature of the soup, the firmness of the bread, the fashion choices of everyone not currently chewing. No one ever sees them carrying a single log to the fire or clearing a dish. You find a crumpled napkin behind the piano and suspect it belongs to the one who claimed to have delicate lungs when asked to help dust the chandeliers. Another declared he would have made an excellent valet had he not been cursed with noble blood, then promptly spilled port on your carpet and blamed the slope of the floor. You try to keep track of their comings and goings, but it's like counting birds in a fog. One day there are 12. The next morning, only 9 at breakfast, but somehow 14 at supper. They vanish during cleaning hours, only to reappear during dessert, refreshed and suspiciously unrumpled. You're fairly certain one of them is sleeping in the music room, which no longer smells like sheet music. After a week, You stop asking questions. You just nod, smile, and make peace with the fact that your home has become a very expensive, slightly haunted boarding house for people who all think they're the main character in a family novel. And, worst of all, you suspect they're waiting for someone to die. The kitchen laughs again. It's muffled through 3 doors and a paneled hallway. But you hear it all the same, sharp, quick, and just a bit too synchronized. The sound of people who don't have to pretend when you're not in the room. You freeze halfway through, removing your gloves, fingers stiff in lace, and listen as footsteps shuffle and a pan clatters. In that way, pans only do when someone's trying not to laugh louder. They're definitely talking about you. You don't know which part of your day became the punchline, but it could be any number of things. The moment your corset came unhooked while standing too close to the pianoforte, the part where you asked the wrong footman for tea and he brought you a ledger, or, more likely, the incident with the bee in the breakfast room that ended with you under the table and a shattered compote of gooseberries. You suspect they're ranking these moments somewhere, possibly on a chalkboard near the root vegetables. They know everything. Not in the mystical, all-seeing way, but in the quiet, observant, deeply inconvenient way that comes from always being just outside the door. They dress you, feed you, clean the rooms you trail mud into. They notice when you rearrange the library and misplace the sugar tongs. They know who visits whom, and how often, and how long the visits last. They know whose letters arrive sealed in wax, and whose arrive already opened. And they talk. Of course they talk. You try to keep your expressions neutral when you walk past the scullery, like a monarch descending among commoners. But you're not fooling anyone. They see right through the carefully pinned hair and forced politeness. One of the kitchen maids curtsies a fraction too slowly, and you catch the smirk she tries to swallow. Another has taken to calling you Miss, with a tone that turns the word into a 4-syllable performance of condescension. They never outright insult you. That would be improper. But you find your shoes relocated, just slightly. Not missing, just waiting at the wrong door. The bell cord in your dressing room mysteriously tangles. The good tea disappears, replaced by the bitter variety that tastes faintly of boiled carpet, and no one ever admits to anything. You pass the butler in the hall. He nods, perfectly polite, but his eyes linger too long, and you wonder if he knows what you said in the conservatory last Tuesday. You wonder if he told the cook, who told the housemaids, who told the footman, who's currently polishing the silver with a kind of smug rhythm that implies inside knowledge. You tried once to outsmart them, left a decoy letter on your writing desk, written in a flourish of invented scandal, sealed and placed conspicuously under your inkwell. By evening, it had been slightly moved, barely perceptible, but just enough. The next day, the housekeeper served you your eggs with an expression of such delicate amusement you had to bite your cheek to keep from reacting. Sometimes, late at night, you think about the servants' hall, that warm, low room tucked beneath the house where stories spill freely and laughter comes easily. You imagine your name slipping between spoonfuls of stew and rolls passed under candlelight. Your latest misadventure shared with theatrical flair. You are, unwittingly, the house's favorite novella. And you don't even get royalties. You could confront them, of course, march into the kitchen and demand decorum. But then you'd have to admit that they matter, that their opinions carry weight, and you're not quite ready to grant them that victory. So instead, you walk a little taller, you speak a little clearer, and when you hear that next burst of laughter from below stairs, you smile tightly, hold your teacup steady, and pretend it doesn't echo in your bones. The house sighs more than it breathes. Each morning begins with a new sound, a creak, a pop, a faint but unmistakable moan from somewhere behind the plaster. You used to wonder if it was ghosts. Now you know better. Ghosts are subtle. Floorboards warped by time are petty, loud, and deeply personal. The ceiling above your bed has started to crack in a slow, deliberate arc. It looks like it's plotting something. You've stared at it long enough to assign it character traits. One day it'll become a full-blown fissure, and you're fairly sure it'll do so dramatically, possibly during tea. The walls shift too, just enough that nothing ever stays quite where it should. That door that once opened with a gentle push now requires your full body weight and a whispered apology. Meanwhile, the door to the linen cupboard swings open entirely unprovoked, usually when you're alone and just vulnerable enough to feel judged by folded towels. You've begun tracking the humidity like an amateur meteorologist with a personal vendetta. Rain makes the hinges swell. Sun makes the windows warp. Fog turns the drawing room into a maze of sticking doors and uneven carpet seams. The house used to feel grand. Now it feels like an elderly relative with unpredictable moods and far too many opinions about the weather. The grand staircase, once the pride of the entryway, now hums underfoot like it's warning you. One step in particular has developed a whimper. You try to avoid it. The staff do not. You're starting to suspect they step on it on purpose, just to hear it complain. Paint peels in slow motion. Wallpaper curls away at the edges like it's tired of pretending to be floral. One of the sconces in the hall has given up entirely and now leans slightly left, as if drunk on the passage of time. You consider straightening it. But the last time you touched something in this house, the curtain rod fell down and nearly ended a cousin. You mention these things to family, and they nod politely, as if acknowledging a minor illness they'd rather not discuss. You suggest repairs, and someone coughs. You bring up modernization, and someone else changes the subject to scones. The house is not just a home, it's a tradition, and traditions, much like old pipes, resist change with alarming pressure. There's mold in the conservatory that you're not allowed to acknowledge. The west wing smells like lavender and something vaguely electrical. The kitchen chimney still works, but only if the wind is from the east and the fire is coaxed with a particular brand of Scottish patience no one's had since the war. You find yourself anthropomorphizing the fixtures. The banister is sulking again. The wardrobe is in one of its stubborn moods. The east-facing windows don't like mornings, and the sink in the guest lavatory only runs hot water if you sing to it. You wish you were joking. Still, no one wants to leave. The idea of abandoning the house is treated like treason. It's falling apart, yes, but it's falling apart beautifully, like a stage set slowly collapsing while the audience refuses to look away. You sometimes think the house is aware of this, that it knows its age gives it power. A newer home would be fixed. This one demands reverence. Late at night, when the wind slips through the gaps in the window frame and the fireplace coughs up another puff of soot, you lie in bed and listen, not for ghosts, not anymore, but for the sound of slow decay, for beams shifting and plaster settling and pipes whispering to one another about better days. You'll age in this house. But the house will always be older, and somehow it will outlive you anyway. You sneeze. A delicate, restrained thing, barely audible, barely present, the kind of sneeze that could vanish into the wallpaper if it tried hard enough. And yet, 5 heads swivel toward you like you just upended the entire moral framework of the empire. Someone coughs pointedly. A teacup rattles against its saucer. Your aunt adjusts her gloves with the precision of a guillotine operator. You sneeze again, slightly more self-conscious, and the atmosphere curdles. It's not the sneeze. It's that you didn't muffle it into a lace handkerchief while subtly turning your head precisely 30 degrees to the left. You forgot the gentle nod of apology, the whisper of pardon, and the ceremonial folding of the kerchief post-sneeze like it's a sacred text. You failed to pretend that sneezing is something only the lower classes and unbaptized animals do. You exist too bodily, and in this house, that is a crime. You don't remember agreeing to these rules, but you're living in a social labyrinth so intricate it might as well have a minotaur in the middle, and every conversation is just another corner to get lost in. Sit too straight and you look rigid. Slouch and you're lazy. Say too little and you're cold. Say too much and someone will definitely quote you in a letter next week. You try to walk the tightrope, but the rope is made of etiquette, and it's soaked in judgment. You reach for a scone, and suddenly 3 sets of eyebrows twitch. Did you pick the wrong tier of the tray? Was it a clotted cream before jam situation or the other way around? You start to spread butter clockwise, then pause halfway through, doubting yourself so hard your soul nearly detaches. You opt for sipping your tea to recover, but sip too loudly and instantly feel like you've committed treason against Queen and country. No one says a word, of course. That would be gauche. Instead, they do something worse. They smile. The kind of smile that says, "We noticed." The kind that floats on a sea of unspoken superiority. You wish someone would just point and yell, "Uncultured swine," so you could get on with your day. But no, this is a quieter battlefield. Every napkin fold, every glance at the clock, every pause before answering a question is loaded with enough subtext to fill a multi-volume memoir. You try complimenting Lady Rothwell's dress, only to realize moments too late that it's last season's trim. The air around her tightens. She thanks you in a tone that could scald tea. You retreat into silence, hoping the sofa swallows you whole. It doesn't. It squeaks. Loudly. They don't teach you these things in any structured way. You're just supposed to know, supposed to absorb it by proximity, like osmosis through starched linen, the precise angle at which to hold a spoon, the volume at which one may laugh without suggesting madness, the art of making a guest feel welcomed without ever directly saying so. Even apologies have choreography. Too sincere and you look desperate. Too brief and you appear flippant. You aim for polite sorrow and land somewhere in mild gastrointestinal discomfort. You once curtsied in a hallway out of sheer panic. No one mentioned it, but for weeks afterward, everyone began greeting you with just slightly more enthusiasm. You suspect they're still laughing about it when you're not in the room, so you rehearse, alone, in your bedroom, practicing how to say charming in a way that sounds like a compliment and not an accusation. How to nod as though you're engaged, but not overly eager. How to cough without suggesting disease, moral or otherwise. You've learned to decode fan gestures, eyebrow tilts, and the many nuanced meanings of the phrase, "How interesting." And still, every day, you get something wrong. The wrong tone, the wrong joke, the wrong cardigan for an afternoon promenade. And every time, the room gets just a little quieter around you. Not with hostility. That would be a kindness. Just the faint, unmistakable shift of people marking you as not quite fluent in their language. You sneeze again. No one reacts. Which is somehow worse. The holly arrives first, carried in by a maid whose apron has been freshly pressed for the occasion, though her eyes suggest she's lived through far too many December 1sts in this house. It's still slightly damp from the morning frost, but that doesn't matter. By the end of the day, it will be wilting in 7 different rooms under the weight of unrealistic expectations and scented candles no one will admit to lighting. Then comes the fruitcake. It lands on the sideboard with the soft thud of something that shouldn't be edible but legally counts as food. You watch it as one might watch a taxidermied animal respectfully, with a twinge of fear. It smells faintly of rum and deeply of obligation. Every year, someone makes it. Every year, everyone eats it. No one likes it. That is not the point. The point is tradition. The point is spectacle. The point is to go through the steps of celebration with the brittle grace of dancers who hate the choreography but refuse to break form. You help string garlands that scratch your wrists and drop pine needles like passive-aggressive breadcrumbs across the floor. You light candles in windows too drafty to hold warmth. You stand back and admire the tree lopsided, heavy with ornaments made by children who are now brooding adults and draped with tinsel that sparkles like it's trying too hard. You are not allowed to be tired. You are allowed to be festive, or at least appear to be. Anything less than a serene smile is considered seasonal heresy. There is a chart somewhere, possibly in your aunt's head, of acceptable reactions to every holiday scenario. If you laugh too hard at a joke about father's waistcoat, it's unseemly. If you don't laugh at all, it's rude. You aim for polite chuckle and land in the uncanny valley of human emotion. Gifts appear overnight like offerings to a benevolent but easily disappointed deity. You know what's inside before you open them. A monogrammed handkerchief, a copy of a book you already own, a scarf that looks suspiciously like the one you gave away last year. You say thank you like it's a spell to keep the room from catching fire. You give gifts too, of course, carefully chosen, beautifully wrapped, and met with mild confusion. Cousin Edwin receives a leather-bound journal he will never use. Aunt Margaret accepts her new shawl with the strained cheer of someone trying to find the embroidery error. There is a meal, and then another. There are courses, so many courses. Pudding is set aflame and paraded in like a guest of honor. It is soaked in enough alcohol to stun a horse. There's always one fork too many, and always one family member who uses it wrong. You try not to look at them, because that way lies madness and a very tense morning after breakfast. Someone always cries. It's usually during pudding. The fire crackles. The port is passed. A comment is made, soft, sharp, barbed, in the way only family can manage, and suddenly someone's blinking too fast and fanning their face. You pretend not to notice. You drink more port. You wonder how many more days this will last. Carols are sung, off-key, and louder than necessary. A child performs a poem with the solemnity of a trial lawyer. There is applause. No one knows what for, but it feels safer than silence. Cards are read aloud from distant relatives you've never met, filled with handwriting that borders on aggressive. Much love sounds like a threat when written in violet ink and underlined twice. Later, you sit by the fire, too full, too warm, and vaguely guilty. Not because you did anything wrong, just because holidays in this house are marinated in guilt the way the fruitcake is marinated in brandy. You think of people not here, people you miss, people you don't. You think of the way joy feels when it's quiet and not orchestrated like a performance. You glance at the decorations. They sparkle in the candlelight, still trying to convince everyone it's all going well. You sip your tea and decide not to mention the garland, slowly slipping off the mantel. Let it fall. Something should. It starts with a letter, cream-colored, wax-sealed, delivered by a footman who looks like he's just run a gauntlet of emotionally charged parlors. You break the seal, already suspecting this won't be about something simple, like a birthday or the arrival of new drapery tassels. It is, of course, from a solicitor. And just like that, the air in the house changes. The furniture holds its breath. The carpets feel somehow accusatory. There's talk of a will, an update, an execution, terms that turn the drawing room into a war room and every relative into a low-budget Machiavelli. You haven't seen some of these cousins in years, and now here they are, arriving with handshakes that last too long and smiles that don't meet their eyes. They ask how you've been as if they care, and you ask them back as if you don't know they once stole your governess's pocket watch. The house, sensing the shift, becomes draftier. Portraits leer from their gilded frames. As if they've been waiting for this, Uncle Bartholomew begins carrying his cane more like a weapon than an aid. Aunt Eugenia insists on recounting the time she nursed grandfather through the influenza of '84, as though loyalty could be notarized. Even the cook starts plating meals with a little more symmetry, perhaps angling for mention in someone's final bequest. Conversations turn elliptical. No one says money aloud, but it pulses behind every compliment, every offer to help with the tea tray, every sudden reminiscence of childhood summers spent here in the very garden where grandfather liked to nap. You listen to these stories and wonder where they were stored all these years, and whether they're rehearsed in front of mirrors when no one's watching. There are meetings, closed doors, rustling papers, raised voices that lower when footsteps approach. You pass your cousin Thomas in the hall, and he gives you a look as if you've both just been accused of the same crime. You share a nod that could mean anything. It probably means everything. At dinner, the tension clinks louder than the silverware. Someone accidentally uses the wrong fork and is treated like they've just announced they were disinheriting the entire bloodline. Toasts are shorter. Laughter has corners. Everyone is trying to be pleasant, and the effort shows in the way they grip their wine glasses like they might shatter under too much sincerity. Then the whispers begin, the late-night ones that hover just beyond door frames, allegations of secret codicils, quiet mentions of jewels gone missing, the suggestion that someone might be rewriting the will even now, possibly under duress, definitely under influence. You catch your name once or twice and pretend not to. It's safer that way. Uncle Harold drops by with a bottle of brandy and a memory of how he once loaned grandfather 10 pounds during a particularly difficult winter. He never asked for it back. Didn't seem right. But perhaps now. Well, sentiment has value too, doesn't it? You nod along and wonder what the current exchange rate is for emotional leverage. It escalates, as these things always do. A locked drawer is found empty. A maid is accused of misplacing a ring. A nephew storms out after being reminded, very publicly, of that unfortunate card debt situation in Vienna. Family members you didn't know existed begin appearing in carriages, clutching old letters as proof of connection, all of them too familiar with the layout of the house. Eventually, the solicitor returns. He clears his throat in the parlor, an act so significant it silences 3 feuds and a minor flirtation. The will is read. Some gasp, some frown, some feign contentment. You try to keep your face still as your name is mentioned, then passed over, then returned to, almost as an afterthought. There is applause, there is silence, there is plotting. When it's done, the room feels smaller, the house tired. Inheritance, it turns out, isn't about objects or titles or the long list of porcelain figurines distributed like odd blessings. It's about who remains civil, who collects stories like currency, and who leaves smiling with something that can't be contested in court. You step outside for air. Behind you, voices rise again, now sharper, now resigned. You look at the old manor, lit with 1,000 inherited expectations, and wonder how much of it still belongs to anyone at all. You wake to the scent of lavender water and something more metallic, something slightly alarming, like a surgeon's tray that's seen too much action. It's not blood, not exactly, just the smell of something that probably used to be inside someone and now isn't. Outside, the air is sharp and damp and allegedly healing, though your lungs beg to differ. The maid cracks the window open with the same look someone might use to serve you a raw turnip for dessert. "It's good for you," she insists. You cough once, and she nods like that's proof. You've got a slight headache, perhaps from sleep or from the fact that your pillow is filled with crushed livestock byproducts and sorrow. The solution, of course, is not water or rest. It's leeches, or possibly arsenic, depending on whom you ask. The house has 3 doctors on speed dial, or rather, a bell system that summons them with varying levels of urgency. One thinks fresh air cures everything. Another insists on mustard plasters for injuries ranging from sore ankles to fractured morals. The third is mostly there to nod sagely and prescribe things that sparkle. Breakfast includes a tonic. It is gray. It fizzes ominously. No one will tell you what's in it, only that it restores the humors, which you suspect is code for tastes like wet coins, but might stop your hands from shaking. Your cousin swears by it. She hasn't blinked in 2 days. By mid-morning, you're summoned for your constitutional. This is Victorian for forced walk through the damp woods while trying not to die of miasma. You're handed a coat heavy enough to qualify as a relative and pushed outside into what is clearly a bog pretending to be a lawn. The air is fresh, which in this case means riddled with mildew and the faint scent of horse. The local health manual calls this invigorating. You call it soggy treason. Upon returning, your hands are chapped, your nose is running, and your ears feel as though someone has inserted tiny, shrieking goblins. You are told this is a sign that your blood is circulating properly. You are not reassured. The governess suggests a rub down with camphor oil. The butler offers a spoonful of something that smells like burnt hair soaked in peppermint. You decline both and instead find yourself in the drawing room, being offered a glass of warm milk with nutmeg and a conversation about your bile. Everything, it seems, returns to bile eventually. Your body is not a mystery. It is a series of clogged pipes, and someone is always nearby with a plunger and a theory. The lady of the house insists you try her arsenic face cream. It revives the complexion, she says, smiling with teeth that are almost certainly dissolving. You take a polite dab and immediately feel both radiant and slightly cursed. By the time tea arrives, your skin tingles with an unease that suggests your pores are trying to escape. A guest at tea mentions he recently underwent bloodletting for what he described as melancholy of the ankles. He seems proud, as if he'd survived a duel rather than a deliberate draining of life fluids by a man who sharpened his instruments on a windowsill. You smile and sip your tea, which contains, unbeknownst to you, trace amounts of mercury, laudanum, and possibly regret. Evening brings the doctor again, this time holding a jar of powdered, something that he claims will cure nerves, indigestion, low spirits, and social inelegance. You don't ask what's in it. You don't want to know. You just nod while the gas lamps flicker, throwing shadows across the wallpaper like ghosts applauding a magic act. You go to bed with a hot brick wrapped in flannel, a garlic clove under your pillow, and a faint worry that your dreams will involve more leeches. The room smells faintly of mint, desperation, and something the maid described as a vapor cure. You don't sleep so much as surrender. In the still of the night, the wind presses against the windows, whispering through the cracks like a distant warning. Somewhere downstairs, a cabinet of tinctures glows softly in the lamplight, each bottle promising health and carrying the silent thread of accidental poetry or death, sometimes both. It starts with a sigh, not yours, though you're close. A long exhale from somewhere behind the wainscoting, too smooth, too deliberate, too intentional. You stop brushing your hair mid-stroke. The fire hasn't quite caught, and your candle flickers, like it's considering other career paths. Outside, the wind presses gently against the panes, whispering as if it knows something you don't, which, if you're being honest, feels increasingly likely. You press a hand against the wallpaper. It's warm. Not room temperature warm, but skin warm, as if the house itself has a pulse. You tell yourself this is normal, that maybe the plumbing is acting up again, or the hot water pipes have formed a union and are demanding attention. But the walls thrum beneath your palm like a heartbeat, slow and steady. Then comes the scratching. Not mice. Mice scratch like they're late to dinner and can't find the door. This is rhythmic, precise, as though someone on the other side is writing, slowly, with a quill dipped in something thick and ancient. You lean in, not because you want to, but because the house seems to lean back, curious about you in return, and that's when you hear it. Latin. You don't speak Latin, but the words curl at the edge of your understanding like forgotten nursery rhymes. It's a chant, not quite melodic, but still catching in your chest like the echo of a forgotten prayer. You whisper back a soft hello, not because you expect an answer, but because silence feels far more dangerous. It replies. A creak, a groan, and suddenly the floorboard beneath your bed sighs like it's exhausted from holding secrets. Dust trembles in the corners. You step back, but the air moves forward, wrapping itself around your ankles like a warning. The fireplace, dormant moments before, exhales smoke without flame, and for the briefest moment, you see a shape inside it. Not in the logs, in the smoke. Watching, you flee. Not in the scandalous running through the hallways kind of way, but the swift, practiced glide of someone who's lived long enough in this house to know it does not like sudden movements. You pass the portrait of Lord Edgar, whose eyes you always assumed followed you out of bad craftsmanship. Tonight, they follow you with intent. His smirk has deepened. In the hallway, the sconces flicker, even though no breeze touches them. The gas lamps hiss, but not rhythmically. They stutter like laughter choked off too late. Something moves at the end of the corridor. Not a person. A shadow without a host, stretching and contracting as if breathing. You try to summon reason. Perhaps it's a draft, or the house settling, or the unfortunate side effect of inhaling too much coal dust and arsenic powder. But reason left after the wallpaper started pulsing. You duck into the linen closet. It feels safe here. The linens are thick and smell like lavender, though you notice the sheets are breathing slightly. Inhale, exhale. You close your eyes and count backward from 100, which is what the governess always recommends during times of stress and ghostly muttering. At 73, the whispers stop. At 40, the warmth fades. At 10, you hear a voice directly behind your ear, saying your name in a tone so calm it sends panic rushing into every part of your body it can reach. When you open your eyes, the closet door is wide open. You didn't open it. The hallway is empty again. The gas lamps burn steadily, too steadily. The silence is total and unnatural. You return to your room. Your candle is out. Your fire burns brightly. The bed has been turned down for you, despite you never ringing the bell. And etched in the condensation on your mirror, perfectly neat cursive reads, "Welcome back." The house doesn't creak as you climb into bed. It exhales, content. You don't sleep that night. You just wait for the house to stop watching. It doesn't. The fire crackles once, spits, and immediately gives up, as if even it has had enough. You wrap your shawl tighter, not because it helps, but because ritual is comforting, and right now, ritual is all you have left. The tea beside you is no longer warm, not even tepid. It tastes like regret and ghost breath, and you sip it anyway because you need something to hold on to, even if it's disappointment in a porcelain cup. The day began with a door slamming on its own and ended with a cousin confessing his love for a woman no one has ever seen, who may or may not be a ghost, and who definitely sleeps in the East Wing. You nodded supportively because objecting would mean participating, and you've learned that passivity is often your best defense in this house. Active resistance only invites retribution, usually from Margaret. You've counted 16 separate family members today, though you only remember inviting 4. The rest seem to materialize from spare rooms and passageways, holding brandy and opinions, most of which are about you. Aunt Lavinia called your shoes brave before comparing them to boiled eels. Uncle Clarence attempted to lecture you on the morality of window coverings. You considered hurling yourself into the rose bushes at least twice before lunch. Still, you endure. Not gracefully, but with the stiff dignity of someone who's read just enough etiquette manuals to know that screaming into a cushion is frowned upon unless it's embroidered, and at least one guest is dead. Somehow, through the ballet of collapsing social niceties and unexplained banging noises in the attic, you manage to make it through the day. Dinner is served 3 hours late, cold as always, and garnished with someone else's tension. Your fork is 1 tine short. No one mentions it. You are not brave enough to ask for another. You spend dessert avoiding eye contact with your cousin, who may or may not be possessed. He speaks only in questions now. Last night he asked if you'd ever heard the wallpaper hum. Tonight he asked where your reflection had gone. You laugh, high and sharp, because that is easier than wondering if he's right. Eventually, mercifully, you're alone again. Mostly, the house never really allows for complete solitude. The chandelier sways when there's no draft. The mirror fogs despite the cold. There are footprints in the dust by the fireplace. Not yours. Too small. Barefoot. You don't check under the bed anymore. Not because you aren't afraid, but because you're certain something would look back. Instead, you slide beneath the blanket's woolen, itchy, likely cursed, and listen to the familiar chorus of the walls settling, the floors sighing, the pipes whispering like disappointed relatives. You breathe. You made it. The wallpaper has not peeled itself into a sigil. The ceiling did not collapse. No portraits cried blood at dinner. The tea was only mildly insulting. This counts as victory. Outside, the wind howls, offended by your survival. You sipped the last of your tea. It's bitter now. Maybe always was. You set the cup down beside the fire, which chooses this exact moment to sputter back to life, as though it's trying to impress you. You don't applaud, but you also don't die, which, in this house, is enough. For now.